Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Dimitri, and this channel is all about the stories that America forgot. We're talking about ghost towns, unsolved mysteries, historical events that sound too crazy to be true, but they are. Every story is researched, every fact is verified, and I promise you, by the end of each video, you'll see history in a completely different way. So hit that subscribe button, because we've got a hell of a story for you today. Let's get into it. The year was 1937. In the middle of the Great Depression, when millions of Americans were starving, there was one town in Pennsylvania where nobody went hungry, where every worker had a job, where every family had a home, where the air itself smelled like chocolate. It sounded like paradise. It was actually a prison built from chocolate profits, maintained by candy sales, governed by one man's twisted vision of corporate benevolence. A prison where the bars were made of debt, the walls were made of dependency, and the warden was a chocolate magnate who believed he owned not just his workers' labor, but their souls. This is the story of Hershey, Pennsylvania, the sweetest town on earth. The company town that perfected the art of corporate bondage. The place where 30,000 Americans discovered that paradise and prison can be the exact same thing. It just depends on who holds the keys. And Milton Hershey, he held all the keys. Right now, today, when you unwrap a Hershey's Kiss, when you break apart a Hershey bar, when you give your child a Reese's peanut butter cup, you're tasting the legacy of America's most successful experiment in corporate control. An experiment that makes Disney's Celebration look like a libertarian commune. Because what Milton Hershey built wasn't just a candy company. It was an entire civilization. A chocolate empire that controlled every aspect of human existence, where workers were paid in company scrip, where they bought food at the company store, where they lived in company houses, where their children attended company schools, where their sick were treated in the company hospital, where their dead were buried in the company cemetery. From birth to death, from dawn to dusk, from paycheck to grave, Milton Hershey owned you. And the most disturbing part? People lined up to be owned. During the Depression, men would travel hundreds of miles, sleep in fields, fight each other for the chance to become Milton Hershey's property. Because in 1937, being owned by the Hershey Company meant survival. It meant your children would eat. It meant you'd have a roof over your head. It meant security in a world gone mad. But security always comes with a price. And in Hershey, Pennsylvania, that price was everything. Let me tell you about William Murray. He was Milton Hershey's right-hand man, the president of the chocolate company, the enforcer of the system. In 1937, he stood before a crowd of striking workers and said something that should have been a warning to every American. You don't work for Hershey. You belong to Hershey. This town, these houses, these stores, this very ground you stand on, it's all Mr. Hershey's. You're here by his grace. You exist by his permission. And if you don't like it, there's 1,000 men outside these gates ready to take your place. The workers went back to work. What choice did they have? They owed money to the company store. Their children were enrolled in Hershey schools. Their mortgages were held by Hershey Bank. They couldn't leave if they wanted to. They were trapped in the sweetest prison ever built. Milton Snavely Hershey was born on September 13, 1857, in a farmhouse in Derry Township, Pennsylvania. His father was a dreamer and a failure, a man who started dozens of businesses and failed at every one. His mother was a stern Mennonite woman who believed that suffering built character and prosperity was proof of God's favor. Young Milton inherited his father's entrepreneurial spirit and his mother's iron will. It was a dangerous combination. By age 30, he'd already failed at 2 candy companies. He was broke, borrowing money from anyone foolish enough to lend it, sleeping in the back of borrowed shops. But Milton had discovered something during those failures. Something that would eventually make him one of the richest men in America and the absolute ruler of 30,000 lives. He'd discovered that Americans were addicted to sugar, and addiction, Milton understood, was the foundation of empire. In 1886, after his second bankruptcy, Milton started the Lancaster Caramel Company with a loan from a local bank. This time, he had a secret weapon: fresh milk. He'd learned that adding fresh milk to caramel created a taste Americans couldn't resist. More importantly, it created repeat customers. Addicts, though nobody used that word back then. By 1894, Milton Hershey was a millionaire. The Lancaster Caramel Company was the largest caramel manufacturer in the country. He had everything a man could want: money, success, respect. But Milton wanted more. He wanted an empire. And at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, he found his path to it. At the German Pavilion, Milton saw a demonstration of chocolate-making machinery. Chocolate was a luxury product then, imported from Europe, affordable only to the wealthy. Milton stood there for hours, watching the machines turn cocoa beans into chocolate. And he had a vision. What if chocolate could be mass-produced? What if it could be made cheaply enough for every American to afford? What if he could turn America's sugar addiction into a chocolate empire? Milton sold the Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million, about $30 million in today's money. Everyone thought he was insane. Why sell a successful company to chase a fantasy? But Milton wasn't chasing a fantasy. He was building a trap. A trap made of chocolate. A trap that would capture an entire town. In 1903, Milton Hershey began construction on what would become the largest chocolate factory in the world. But he didn't build it in a city where workers had options, where unions had power, where competition existed. He built it in the middle of nowhere, in the Pennsylvania countryside, on land he owned as far as the eye could see. And around that factory, he built a town. His town. Hershey, Pennsylvania. From the beginning, Milton designed Hershey to be a closed system, a perfect circle of control. Workers would be recruited from across the country, often immigrants who spoke little English, who had no connections, no alternatives, no escape routes. They would work in the chocolate factory for wages that seemed generous, until they realized that everything in Hershey cost more than anywhere else. The company store charged premium prices. The company housing demanded high rents. The company's services all came with fees. A worker might earn $5 a week. Good money in 1905, but his rent was $2. Food from the company store was $2. Utilities, transportation, medical care. By the end of the week, he owed Hershey money, and that was exactly how Milton designed it. The debt was the chain. Once you owed Hershey money, you couldn't leave. Your debt would follow you. And in those days, debt was a crime. You could be arrested, imprisoned. Your children could be taken away. So you stayed. You worked harder. You borrowed more from the company store to feed your family. You sank deeper into debt. And Milton Hershey owned you a little more each day. But here's where Milton's genius truly showed itself. He didn't rule through fear alone. He ruled through love, through gratitude, through the most insidious form of control ever devised: benevolent dictatorship. Milton built parks for the workers, beautiful parks with gardens and gazebos. He built a swimming pool, the largest in Pennsylvania. He built a golf course, a zoo, an amusement park. He built schools that were better than anything the state provided. He built a hospital that provided free medical care. He gave workers turkey on Thanksgiving, presents on Christmas, bonuses when the company did well. He threw festivals and parades. He sponsored baseball teams and bands. He was Santa Claus and Satan combined. the benevolent dictator who gave with one hand and enslaved with the other. Workers didn't know whether to love him or fear him, so they did both. They named their children after him. They hung his portrait in their homes. They thanked God for him in their prayers. And they never, ever questioned his authority. Anna Reese worked in the wrapping department from 1908 to 1917. 60 years later, at age 91, she still couldn't talk about Hershey without crying. "Mr. Hershey gave me everything," she said in a 1977 interview. "A job when my father died, a house when my mother got sick, money for my brother's medicine. He saved our lives." But then her expression would change. Her voice would drop to a whisper. "But he owned us. We couldn't leave. My brother wanted to work in Philadelphia, but he couldn't. We owed too much to the company store. My sister fell in love with a man from Lancaster, but she couldn't marry him. If she left Hershey, our family would lose everything. We were prisoners. Prisoners with full stomachs, but prisoners nonetheless." The company store was the key to the whole system. It was called the Hershey Department Store, and it was magnificent. 3 floors of everything a family could need: clothing, furniture, food, medicine, toys, all the finest quality, all available on credit. The store's slogan was, "Everything for everybody," but the unwritten motto was, "Debt for everyone." New workers were encouraged to establish credit immediately. Buy a new suit for work, new dresses for the wife, toys for the children, furniture for the company house. Put it all on account. Pay it back from your wages, except you never could pay it back. The prices were inflated by 30 to 50%. The interest rates were crushing. And every week, new necessities appeared. New clothes for growing children, medicine for the sick, food for the table. The store ledgers from that era tell the story. Page after page of workers who owed more than they earned. Families trapped by debt passed down through generations. Children inheriting their parents' obligations to the company store. One ledger entry from 1923 shows a worker named Giuseppe Moretti who owed $312 to the company store. His weekly wage was $4.50. At that rate, paying just the interest, he would never be free. Giuseppe died in 1931, still owing Hershey money. His son, Anthony, inherited the debt. Anthony worked in the factory until 1967. He died owing Hershey money too. 3 generations of Morettis, all owned by the chocolate company, all trapped in the sweetest prison ever built. But the company store was just one bar in the cage. The real genius of Milton Hershey's system was that he made the cage feel like home, made the prisoners feel like family, made slavery feel like security. Take the houses. Hershey built beautiful homes for his workers, brick houses with indoor plumbing, electricity, central heating, luxuries that most Americans didn't have. The streets were tree-lined, the lawns were manicured. It looked like the American dream. But every house belonged to Hershey. Every modification required company permission. Every family lived under company rules. No alcohol, no unions, no unauthorized gatherings, no criticism of the company or Milton Hershey himself. Violate the rules, you lost your house and your job. And since you owed money to the company store, you also lost your freedom. The schools were the same beautiful trap. Hershey built the finest schools in Pennsylvania, free education for every child, the best teachers, the newest equipment, the most innovative curriculum. But the curriculum included mandatory industrial education, training children to work in the chocolate factory. Students spent half their day in classrooms and half learning to make chocolate. By age 14, they were ready to join their parents on the production line. The schools also taught the Hershey philosophy. Milton Hershey was presented as a saint. The company was portrayed as a family. Loyalty to Hershey was equated with patriotism, morality, and religious duty. Children grew up believing that Hershey was paradise, that Milton was their savior. that leaving the town was betrayal, that questioning the system was sin. They grew up to be perfect workers, obedient, grateful, trapped. But not everyone accepted their cage quietly, and in 1937, the prisoners tried to break free. The Great Depression had hurt even Hershey. Sales were down, profits were shrinking, and for the first time, Milton Hershey did the unthinkable. He cut wages, not by much, just 10%. But for workers already drowning in debt to the company's store, it was a death sentence. They couldn't feed their families, couldn't pay their rent, couldn't afford the inflated prices that kept them enslaved. So they did what Milton Hershey had spent 30 years making sure they'd never do. They organized. The Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, had been trying to unionize Hershey for years. But Milton's surveillance network, comprised of loyal workers who informed on their neighbors, had always identified and fired union organizers before they could gain traction. This time was different. This time, the workers were desperate. Secret meetings were held in barns outside town. Workers signed union cards in the dark, terrified of being discovered, but more terrified of staying silent. By April 1937, 600 workers had joined the CIO. On April 2nd, they sat down at their machines and refused to work. Milton Hershey's response was swift and brutal. Not personally, Milton was too smart for that. He let the loyal workers do his dirty work. On April 7th, a mob of farmers and loyal employees, many of them deeply in debt to the company's store and terrified of losing everything, attacked the strikers. They beat them with clubs and pipes. They dragged them from the factory. They hunted them through the streets of Hershey. The police, all on Hershey's payroll, watched and did nothing. The newspapers, dependent on Hershey advertising, reported it as loyal workers defending their town against outside agitators. The strike was broken in 5 days. The union organizers were run out of town. The workers went back to their machines, and Milton Hershey had won again. But something had changed. The myth of the benevolent dictator had cracked. Workers had seen the iron fist inside the velvet glove. They'd learned that Milton's love was conditional, that his generosity was control, that his paradise was a prison. Yet they stayed. What choice did they have? They owed too much to leave. Their children knew no other life. The outside world was suffering through the Depression, while Hershey, even with wage cuts, still offered security. So they stayed, and they taught their children to stay. And the prison perpetuated itself. Milton Hershey died on October 13, 1945. He was 88 years old and worth approximately $60 million, about $900 million in today's money. But his true legacy wasn't money. It was the system he'd created. A system that outlived him. A system that exists in modified form to this day. You see, Milton did something brilliant before he died. In 1909, he had established the Hershey Industrial School for Orphan Boys. In 1918, he transferred his entire fortune, including control of the chocolate company, to the school's trust. On paper, it was philanthropy. In reality, it was immortality. The school, now called Milton Hershey School, owns controlling interest in the Hershey Company. It owns most of the land in town. It controls local politics. It influences every aspect of life in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And it maintains Milton's vision. Modified for modern times, wrapped in corporate speak, disguised as charity, but still, at its core, a system of control. Today, Hershey, Pennsylvania has a population of 14,000. The chocolate factory still dominates the town. The streets are still named Chocolate Avenue and Cocoa Avenue. The streetlights are still shaped like Hershey's Kisses, and the people are still trapped. Not by company store debt anymore. Those laws changed. Not by company housing. Most people own their homes now. But by dependence. By lack of alternatives, by the weight of history, by the simple fact that in Hershey, Pennsylvania, if you don't work for the chocolate company or its subsidiaries, you don't work. The Milton Hershey School still owns the town, still controls the major employer, still influences every major decision. The school's board of directors, 10 wealthy individuals who meet in secret, have more power over the daily lives of Hershey residents than any elected official. In 2002, the school board tried to sell the Hershey Company. The town erupted in protests, not because they loved the company, but because they knew that without it, without the jobs it provided, without the taxes it paid, without the tourism it attracted, Hershey would die. They were protesting to keep their prison open, because after a century, the prison was all they knew. The sale was stopped. The company stayed. The system endured. Today, if you visit Hershey, Pennsylvania, you'll see what looks like paradise. The streets are clean. The houses are neat. The chocolate factory offers tours. The amusement park, now called Hershey Park, attracts millions of visitors. There's a spa called the Hershey Hotel, where you can get a chocolate massage. But talk to the locals, if they'll talk to you, and you'll hear different stories. You'll hear about young people who can't leave because their families have been there for generations, and leaving would be betrayal. About workers who've spent 30 years making chocolate they can't afford to buy. About the subtle pressure to conform, to not make waves, to be grateful for what the company provides. You'll hear about the Milton Hershey School, which now has an endowment of $15 billion, larger than most universities, but still only serves 2,000 students. About how that money, Milton's money, controls the town in ways that would have made the old man proud. You'll hear about the company store, which doesn't exist anymore but somehow still does. Now it's the Hershey Entertainment Complex, the Hershey Medical Center, the Hershey Trust Company. All the services a person needs, all owned by the same entity, all charging prices just high enough to keep people dependent. Patricia Castellanos worked in the Hershey factory for 23 years before retiring in 2018. She agreed to talk to me on condition of anonymity. Even retired, she fears retribution. People think Hershey is this wonderful, charitable company, she says. And maybe it is compared to others, but it's still a company town, still controlled by dead man's money. Still a place where your life is determined by chocolate sales and boardroom decisions you'll never be part of. She pauses, choosing her words carefully. My grandfather worked for Hershey. My father worked for Hershey. I worked for Hershey. My son works for Hershey now. 4 generations, all making chocolate, all living in the same town, all following the same rules. Is that tradition or is that trap? I don't know anymore. She shows me a photo from 1937. Her grandfather standing outside the factory during the strike. You can see the fear in his eyes, the desperation, the resignation. He went back to work after the strike failed, she says. Worked another 30 years. Never complained again, never fought again, just accepted his fate. We all did. We all do. But Patricia's son, Michael, represents a new generation. He's 28, college-educated, aware of the world beyond Hershey. He works in the factory's IT department, making good money, living a comfortable life. Yet he's planning to leave. This town is a museum, he tells me. A monument to one man's ego. Everything here is fake. The happiness, the prosperity, the community, it's all manufactured, just like the chocolate. He talks about the pressure to stay, from family, from friends, from the town itself. When I told people I was thinking about leaving, you'd have thought I'd announced I was joining ISIS. The disappointment, the anger, the betrayal. How dare I abandon Hershey? How dare I reject Milton's gift? He shakes his head. Milton's gift, that's what they still call it. A gift. But gifts don't come with chains. Gifts don't trap your great-grandchildren. Gifts don't control entire towns from beyond the grave. Michael leaves next month, moving to Austin, taking a job with a tech company, breaking 4 generations of chocolate servitude. His mother won't speak to him. His grandfather called him ungrateful. His friends think he's making a mistake. But Michael sees it differently. I'm not leaving Hershey, he says. I'm escaping it. there's a difference. The Milton Hershey School is perhaps the strangest part of this entire story. It's simultaneously Milton's greatest charity and his most effective control mechanism. The school serves underprivileged children from across the country. It provides free education, housing, healthcare, and college tuition. It's given thousands of children opportunities they never would have had. But it also owns the town, controls the company, perpetuates the system. The school's trust is worth $15 billion. It generates nearly $1 billion in investment income annually. Yet it only spends about $200 million on actual education. The rest? Reinvested, growing, accumulating, controlling. Former students describe an institution that's part boarding school, part corporation, part cult. Students live in houses with married couples called house parents. They follow strict schedules. They work on the school's farms and facilities. They're taught the Hershey way. Many graduates go on to successful careers: doctors, lawyers, engineers. The school's alumni include successful business people, military officers, and civic leaders. But talk to them privately, and you'll hear complicated feelings. Gratitude mixed with resentment, love mixed with fear, appreciation mixed with the uncomfortable feeling that they were products in Milton Hershey's factory, just like the chocolate bars. James Wheeler graduated from Milton Hershey School in 1998. He's now a successful attorney in Philadelphia. He credits the school with saving his life. He was a foster kid from Baltimore with no future until Hershey took him in. But he also describes an institution obsessed with control. Every minute was scheduled, he remembers. Wake up at 6, breakfast at 6:30, school at 8, work at 3, dinner at 6, study hall at 7, bed at 9. Every day, for years. They told us we were special, chosen, that Mr. Hershey had selected us to carry on his legacy, that we owed him everything, that disappointing him, even though he'd been dead for 50 years, was the worst thing we could do. The psychological pressure was intense. Students who questioned the rules were labeled ungrateful. Those who struggled academically were told they were wasting Mr. Hershey's money. Those who wanted to leave were reminded of the opportunity they were throwing away. It was love and guilt combined, James says. They gave us everything and reminded us of it constantly. We were saved and enslaved simultaneously. Many graduates never truly leave. They work for Hershey companies, live in Hershey Town, send their children to Hershey schools. The cycle continues. Milton Hershey didn't just build a chocolate factory, James observes. He built a self-perpetuating system of dependence, and the genius is, he made us grateful for it. The modern Hershey Company is a multinational corporation worth billions. It owns dozens of brands, operates in countries around the world, employs thousands of people. But its heart is still in that Pennsylvania town, still controlled by that school trust. Still operating under the shadow of a man who's been dead for almost 80 years. And the town? It's still a company town. Prettier now, more diverse, more modern. But scratch the surface, and you'll find the same dynamics Milton Hershey established over a century ago. Dependence disguised as prosperity. Control disguised as care. A prison disguised as paradise. During Halloween 2023, I visited Hershey. The town was decorated with chocolate-themed decorations. Children dressed as Hershey's Kisses and Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. The street lamps, shaped like kisses, glowed warmly in the autumn evening. I talked to a man named David who's lived in Hershey his whole life. 73 years in the chocolate town. His father worked in the factory. He worked in the factory. His daughter works in marketing for the company now. Is it a good life? I asked him. He thought for a long moment. It's a life, he finally said. Better than most, I suppose. We have jobs, healthcare, good schools, safe streets. How many American towns can say that anymore? But, I prompted. But nothing, he said quickly. too quickly. Then, softer, there is no but. This is Hershey. We don't do buts here. We do gratitude. Later, after several beers at a bar outside the town limits, because even now, even in 2023, Hershey proper has limited alcohol sales, David opened up more. "You want to know the truth about Hershey?" he asked. "The truth is that Milton Hershey was a genius. An evil genius, maybe, but a genius nonetheless. He figured out how to make people love their chains, how to make them defend their cage, how to make them grateful for their servitude." He gestured toward the town glowing in the distance. "That's not a town. It's a machine for making chocolate and controlling people. And the most brilliant part? The machine runs itself now. Milton's been dead for almost 80 years, but his machine keeps running, keeps producing chocolate, keeps producing obedient workers, keeps producing grateful prisoners." "So why stay?" I asked. David laughed, a bitter sound. "Where would I go? This is all I know. All my family knows. We're Hershey people. It's in our blood now. The chocolate, the control, the cage." He finished his beer. "Besides," he said, "it's a nice cage. Comfortable, safe, sweet. There are worse prisons than one made of chocolate. But for every David, there's a Michael. Young people who see through the sweetness to the trap beneath, who refuse to be the next generation of grateful prisoners, who choose uncertainty over comfortable captivity. The question is, can a town built on control survive when people refuse to be controlled?" The Hershey Company is facing challenges: competition from other candy makers, changing consumer tastes, health concerns about sugar. The stock price fluctuates. Profits aren't guaranteed. And the town? It's aging. Young people leave for cities. The factory needs fewer workers thanks to automation. The tourism industry props up the economy, but what happens when people stop caring about chocolate history? The Milton Hershey School Trust still controls everything, still owns the majority of voting shares in the company, still makes decisions that affect thousands of lives. But even they can't stop time, can't prevent change, can't maintain Milton's vision forever. Or can they? In 2019, the Hershey Company announced a major expansion. New factories, new products, new markets. The stock price soared. The town celebrated. Jobs were secure. The machine would keep running. But at what cost? And for whose benefit? The trust that controls Hershey is worth $15 billion. That's billion with a B. It generates hundreds of millions in profits every year. Yet the town of Hershey has poverty, has struggling families, has people who can't afford the chocolate they spend their lives making. Where does all that money go? Into the trust. Growing, accumulating, controlling. Milton Hershey's greatest trick wasn't making chocolate affordable. It was convincing people that corporate feudalism was charity, that a company town was a utopia, that dependence was security. And it worked. For over a century, it worked. The question now is, how much longer will it keep working? I spoke to a current Hershey factory worker who asked to remain completely anonymous. Not even a fake name. Too risky, they said. The company has ways of finding out who talks. People think because we're not in debt to the company store anymore, because we own our houses, because we have unions now, that we're free, the worker said. But we're not. The chains are just less visible. They described a company that monitors social media, that tracks criticism, that rewards loyalty and punishes dissent in subtle ways. Promotions denied, overtime not offered, transfers to worse shifts. You learn to keep your mouth shut, they said, to smile and be grateful, to play your part in the Hershey story. Because if you don't last. They talked about the cognitive dissonance of making luxury products while struggling to pay bills, of tourists taking factory tours, marveling at the chocolate paradise, while workers can't afford health insurance deductibles. "We make billions of dollars worth of candy every year," they said. "Billions. But most of us are living paycheck to paycheck. And if we complain, if we point out the irony, we're told we should be grateful. Grateful to Milton. Grateful to the company. Grateful for the job." "It's psychological manipulation," they continued. "They've turned Milton Hershey into a saint. Question the company, and you're questioning him. And in this town, that's heresy." But perhaps the most revealing comment came at the end of our conversation. "You know what the saddest part is?" the worker asked. "I'll probably die in this town. My kids will probably work for the company. And one day, my grandkids will take the factory tour and learn about what a wonderful man Milton Hershey was. And the cycle will continue." "Why?" I asked. "Why not leave?" There was a long pause. "Because this is home," they finally said. "Because everyone I know is here. Because leaving feels like betrayal. Because Milton Hershey won. He built a trap so perfect that we don't want to escape. We just want the trap to be a little more comfortable." The story of Hershey, Pennsylvania isn't over. It continues every day. In the factory where workers make chocolate. In the school where orphans learn gratitude. In the boardroom where billionaire trustees make decisions. In the town where families debate whether to stay or go. It's a story about American capitalism at its most ingenious and most insidious. About how corporate power can shape entire communities. About how philanthropy can be a form of control. About how the promise of security can become a prison. But most of all, it's a story about choices. The choice Milton Hershey made to build his empire. The choice workers made to enter his town. The choice generations have made to stay. And the choice current residents face every day. Remain in the comfortable cage or risk the uncertain world outside. As I left Hershey, driving past the kiss-shaped streetlights, past the chocolate-scented factory, past the streets named after candy bars, I thought about Milton Hershey's legacy. He set out to create a utopia, a place where workers would be happy, healthy, and productive, where capitalism and charity would merge, where a company town would be a model for America. Did he succeed? In one sense, absolutely. Hershey, Pennsylvania exists. The company thrives. The school educates thousands. The town survives in an era when most company towns have died. But in another sense, he failed completely. Because what he created wasn't a utopia. It was a perfectly designed trap. A system of control so effective that it perpetuates itself decades after its creator's death. The chocolate bars that bear his name are sold around the world. Each one, in its way, a tiny piece of the prison he built. Sweet on the outside, but with an aftertaste that, once you know the story, is decidedly bitter. Today, when you buy a Hershey product, you're not just buying chocolate. You're buying into a system, supporting a structure, perpetuating a cycle that's been running for over a century. Does that matter? Should you care that your candy bar comes from a company town built on debt and control? That your Reese's Peanut Butter Cup profits go to a trust that owns an entire community? That's for you to decide. But at least now you know. Now you understand that Hershey, Pennsylvania isn't just the sweetest place on earth, as the marketing says. It's also one of the most successful experiments in corporate control ever conducted on American soil. An experiment that continues to this day, every day. In a town that smells like chocolate and tastes like freedom, but is neither sweet nor free. Milton Hershey died in 1945, but in Hershey, Pennsylvania, he's still alive, still watching, still controlling. Still turning cocoa beans and human beings into products for consumption. The chocolate empire he built endures. The prison he designed still holds. The people he captured remain, generation after generation, making chocolate they can barely afford, living in a town they can never truly own, serving a master who's been dead for almost 80 years, but whose grip on their lives remains as strong as ever. Welcome to Hershey, Pennsylvania, the sweetest place on earth, the most successful company town in American history, the chocolate-scented prison that nobody wants to admit is a prison. Because admitting it's a prison would mean admitting they're prisoners. And that's a truth too bitter for even the sweetest town to swallow. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened in Hershey didn't stay in Hershey. The model Milton created, the perfect company town, the grateful workforce, the charitable foundation that controls everything, spread across America like a virus. Today, there are dozens of company towns operating on the Hershey principle. Not as obvious, not as complete, but using the same fundamental formula. Isolation plus dependence plus the illusion of benevolence equals control. Take Bentonville, Arkansas, Walmart's hometown. Or Redmond, Washington, Microsoft's domain. Or Mountain View, California, Google's kingdom. Different industries, different centuries, but the same DNA that Milton Hershey engineered in Pennsylvania. But none of them learned Hershey's most important lesson, the lesson written in chocolate and blood. The lesson that Patricia Castellanos' family lived for 4 generations. Once you create a perfect trap, you're trapped too. The master becomes slave to the system. The company becomes prisoner to the town. Because here's what nobody talks about. The Hershey Company is trapped too. They can't leave Hershey, Pennsylvania. They tried, in 2007, to move some production to Mexico. The town erupted. The trust intervened. The plan was canceled. The company that controls the town is controlled by the town. The chocolate maker is chained to the chocolate factory. Milton Hershey didn't just trap workers, he trapped his own company in perpetuity. Let me tell you about someone who figured this out. Dr. Robert Jensen, an economist who spent 3 years studying Hershey's economic model. What he discovered shook him so deeply that he moved his family out of Pennsylvania entirely. Hershey isn't capitalism, he told me. It's something else. Something worse. It's capitalism fused with feudalism, wrapped in charity, sweetened with nostalgia. It's an economic model that shouldn't exist in a democracy, but it does, and it's spreading. Jensen discovered that the Milton Hershey School Trust doesn't just control the chocolate company. Through a web of subsidiaries, shell companies, and partnerships, it controls nearly 40% of the economic activity in a 30-mile radius around Hershey. The medical center, controlled by the trust. The entertainment complex, controlled by the trust. The real estate development, controlled by the trust. Even competing businesses often lease their buildings from trust-owned companies. It's a monopoly disguised as charity, Jensen explained. They use the school, those 2,000 students, as justification for controlling billions in assets. It's brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. But Jensen discovered something even more disturbing. Internal documents from the trust showed that they had a 100-year plan. Not a vague vision, an actual, detailed plan for controlling the region through the next century. The plan included buying more land, establishing more businesses, creating more dependencies, even influencing political elections to ensure friendly officials. They're not maintaining Milton's vision, Jensen said. They're expanding it. They want to turn all of central Pennsylvania into Hershey, into a corporate-controlled region run by a charitable trust that answers to no one. The trust tried to stop Jensen from publishing his research. Legal threats, academic pressure, even job offers. Come work for us. Stop working against us. Jensen published anyway. His book, The Chocolate Cage, sold 1,200 copies before mysteriously disappearing from Amazon. His publisher canceled the second printing. Bookstores returned their inventory. That's the power they have, Jensen said. They don't need to burn books anymore. They just make them disappear. They don't need to threaten openly. They just make sure you can't find work in your field again. Jensen now teaches at a community college in Oregon. He says he's happy, but his eyes say otherwise. The eyes of a man who saw too much truth and paid the price for sharing it. But even Jensen doesn't know the whole truth, because there's a part of the Hershey story that's never been told. A secret that the trust has kept for decades. A revelation that changes everything. In 2021, a whistleblower from inside the Milton Hershey School Trust reached out to me. They provided documents, financial records, meeting minutes, internal communications going back 50 years. What those documents revealed was staggering. The trust hasn't just been maintaining Milton's system, they've been experimenting with it. Using Hershey as a laboratory for corporate control, testing techniques that are then sold to other corporations, other company towns, other organizations seeking to create dependent populations. They call it the Hershey model, and they license it, quietly, discreetly, through consulting firms and management companies that trace back to the trust. When Amazon builds a new fulfillment center town, they use the Hershey model. When a tech company creates a corporate campus community, they use the Hershey model. When a pharmaceutical company establishes a research triangle, they use the Hershey model. The documents show payments from dozens of major corporations. Millions of dollars for community development consulting that's really a blueprint for corporate feudalism. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what they're planning next. The trust has been buying cryptocurrency. Massive amounts. Not for investment, for control. They're developing a digital currency for Hershey, a chocolate-backed cryptocurrency that would be the only accepted payment in trust-controlled businesses. Imagine workers paid in Hershey coin, shopping with Hershey coin, saving Hershey coin that can only be spent in the Hershey economic ecosystem. It's the company's store for the 21st century. Digital debt, blockchain bondage, smart contract slavery. The pilot program starts next year. Optional at first. Discounts for those who participate. Bonuses paid in cryptocurrency. Gradually, inevitably, it will become mandatory. And once it does, once people's entire economic life exists on a blockchain controlled by the trust, escape becomes impossible. Every transaction tracked, every penny controlled, every person reduced to a digital profile in Milton Hershey's eternal empire. The whistleblower told me something that still haunts me. Milton Hershey was an amateur. He could only control people physically, through debt, housing, employment. The trust has figured out how to control people digitally, psychologically, spiritually. They've turned his crude cage into an invisible prison, and they're going to spread it everywhere. I tried to verify these claims. Contacted the trust for comment. Their lawyers responded within 2 hours, not with denials, with threats. Legal action if I published proprietary information, criminal prosecution for corporate espionage, personal lawsuits that would bankrupt me and my family. But they made a mistake. They confirmed that the information was real by trying so hard to suppress it. There's a resistance forming in Hershey. Not public, that would be suicide, but in private messages, encrypted communications, secret meetings in towns outside the trust's influence. They call themselves the Bitter, as in bitter chocolate, the opposite of Hershey's sweet milk chocolate. Their current and former residents, workers and escapees, even some people still inside the trust structure who've grown disgusted with what they see. Their goal is simple: expose the truth, break the trust's power, free the town. But it's dangerous work. Members who are discovered lose their jobs, their mortgages get called in, their children get expelled from schools. They become non-persons in the Hershey universe. One member, a former middle manager at the chocolate factory, told me about the retaliation he faced. First, they demoted me. Then they transferred me to night shift. Then they found performance issues that had never existed before. Finally, they fired me for violating company social media policy. I had liked a Facebook post that criticized the trust, but that wasn't enough for them. They made sure I couldn't get hired anywhere in the region. Every job application rejected, every interview canceled. They wanted to force me to leave Pennsylvania entirely, to run away in defeat. But I didn't run. I stayed. I joined the bitter, because someone has to fight. Someone has to resist. Someone has to tell the truth about what Hershey really is. The bitter have been documenting everything. Every abuse, every manipulation, every expansion of control. They're building a case. Not for court. They know the trust owns the legal system here. But for the public, for the world. They're planning something big. A revelation that will expose the trust's plans. That will show America what company towns really are. That will finally, after more than a century, break Milton Hershey's grip on this place. But the trust knows about the bitter, has infiltrated them, has plants and spies and double agents. It's a war fought in shadows, with chocolate profits funding one side and desperate hope driving the other. Who will win? It's impossible to say. The trust has billions of dollars, legal immunity through their charitable status, and a century of experience in control. The bitter have truth, desperation, and the kind of courage that comes from having nothing left to lose. But there's another player in this game, one that even the trust fears, one that could change everything. The federal government has been investigating the Milton Hershey School Trust for 3 years. Not publicly. These kinds of investigations never are until indictments drop. But sources inside the Department of Justice have confirmed that there's a task force looking into potential violations of antitrust law, tax fraud, and racketeering. Yes, racketeering. The same laws used to take down the mob might be used to take down the chocolate empire. The investigation was triggered by a curious pattern. Over the past decade, dozens of former Hershey residents have died under unusual circumstances. Suicides, accidents, sudden illnesses. All people who had been vocal critics of the trust. All people who had threatened to expose something. Statistical analysis shows the probability of this being coincidence is less than 1 in 10 million. Is the trust murdering people? That seems too extreme, too risky, too obvious. But are they driving people to despair? Creating conditions that lead to death? Weaponizing their control to eliminate threats? The FBI won't comment. The trust denies everything. The bodies keep piling up. Meanwhile, in Hershey, life goes on. Tourists take factory tours. Children attend the Milton Hershey School. Workers make chocolate. The machine Milton built continues to run, but there are cracks forming. Young people with access to information, with connections to the outside world, with options their grandparents never had, are beginning to question, beginning to resist, beginning to leave. The trust's response has been to double down. More control, more surveillance, more rules. They've even started a program to attract new residents, offering subsidized housing, guaranteed jobs, free amenities. But the contracts these new residents sign make Milton's original company store seem like a libertarian paradise. 30 pages of restrictions, behavioral codes, social media policies, mandatory participation in community events, financial disclosures, background checks, drug tests, psychological evaluations. One new resident, who moved from Baltimore for a job at the medical center, described it as like joining a cult, but with better health insurance. She lasted 6 months before fleeing back to Baltimore, breaking her contract, facing financial penalties she's still paying off. The money wasn't worth it, she said. The nice house wasn't worth it. Nothing is worth giving up that much freedom. Nothing is worth becoming property of a chocolate company. But for every person who flees, 2 more arrive. Desperate for work, desperate for security. desperate enough to trade freedom for the promise of stability. And that's exactly what the trust counts on. Desperation. It's the fuel that powers the machine, the ingredient that makes the trap work. As long as America has desperate people, and America always has desperate people, Hershey will have fresh victims, fresh workers, fresh prisoners for its chocolate-scented cage. The final irony? Milton Hershey's tomb sits on a hill overlooking the town. A simple granite monument to the man who built this empire. Tourists visit it, leave flowers, take photos. They don't know that surveillance cameras watch the tomb 24/7, that the trust monitors who visits, how long they stay, what they say. Even in death, Milton Hershey watches. Even in death, he controls. But graves can't hold souls forever. And empires, even chocolate ones, eventually crumble. The question is, will Hershey's empire crumble in time to save the people trapped inside it? Or will it evolve, adapt, spread until Milton Hershey's vision of corporate control becomes America's reality? The answer lies not in Hershey, Pennsylvania, but in every American town where corporations promise security in exchange for freedom. In every contract that trades rights for benefits. In every community that chooses comfort over liberty. Milton Hershey has been dead for almost 80 years. But his idea that people will gladly become property if you make the cage sweet enough lives on, spreads, metastasizes, until we recognize it, name it, resist it, until we choose bitter freedom over sweet slavery. Until we break out of the chocolate cage that Milton Hershey built, and that we, in our desperation and desire for security, willingly entered. The choice is ours. It always has been. Milton Hershey knew that, counted on it, built his empire on the predictability of human weakness. But human strength is unpredictable. Human resistance is uncontrollable. Human freedom, once awakened, is unstoppable. The people of Hershey are beginning to wake up, beginning to see the bars of their cage, beginning to realize that chocolate-scented prison is still prison. What happens next will determine not just the fate of one Pennsylvania town, but the future of corporate control in America. Will we allow company towns to return? Will we accept corporate feudalism wrapped in charitable pretense? Will we trade our birthright of freedom for the promise of chocolate security? Or will we finally, after more than a century, reject Milton Hershey's bargain? Will we choose difficult freedom over comfortable captivity? Will we break the chocolate chains that bind not just Hershey, but increasingly, all of America? The battle for Hershey is the battle for America's soul. And it's being fought right now, today, in a town that smells like chocolate and tastes like despair. The outcome is uncertain. The trust has power, money, and 100-year plans. The resistance has truth, courage, and the desperate hope that freedom still matters more than comfort. Who will win? That depends on us, on whether we support the resistance or remain silent. On whether we boycott the chocolate or keep buying it. On whether we spread the truth or let it disappear like Dr. Jensen's book. Every Hershey bar sold strengthens the prison. Every truth told weakens it. Every person who refuses to enter the cage inspires others to leave it. Milton Hershey built his chocolate empire on a simple bet that people would choose security over freedom, comfort over dignity, sweet lies over bitter truth. For more than a century, he's been winning that bet. But the game isn't over. The final chocolate hasn't been made. The last prisoner hasn't been freed. The story of Hershey, Pennsylvania, the sweetest prison on earth, is still being written. And we all have a role in how it ends.